Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. My name is Sharon Fitzpatrick, and I'm your co-host for today's webinar, Before and After, How to Make Amazing Slides Fast with Mike Parkinson. Joining me as co-host is Dave Zielinski, the editor of Presentation Expert. Today's webinar is part of the Expert Thinking program that we created, which offers a robust peer-to-peer community for presentation professionals to share ideas, resources, and start discussions. We recently moved it from Ning to Google+, so we hope you'll join. In addition, we started this webinar program to offer engaging conversations with presentation experts like Matt Gambino, Gitesh Bajaj, Rick Altman, Ellen Finkelstein, Nolan Ham, and others. Join the Twitter conversation. Use hashtag PresentationExpert. It is my pleasure to introduce Dave Zielinski, the editor of Presentation Expert and an award-winning writer. His book, Master Presenter, Lessons from the World's Top Experts on Becoming a More Influential Speaker, has received critical acclaim since its release last year. You can order it through Amazon or through the link on our website. Dave, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very, very much for being here and for having me. In my experience, all of us are in a difficult situation. We are asked to do way more with way less. I find that me and my clients and my peers are asked to create amazing slides, and we have very little time, resources, and money to do it. So today what we're going to learn how to do is to create these amazing slides very, very quickly. We're going to do it by creating our own presentation toolbox that will be as close to a push-button solution as I can come up with. If there's a faster solution, please let me know. Before we begin, I have a question for you. If you don't mind, take a poll, answer. I'm curious, what do you think makes a slide truly amazing? Do you think it's clarity? Do you think it's making sure that the content is easily understood and meaningful, that it's audience focused? Do you think that it's about making the information memorable? Do you think it's about the professionalism? Are there any errors in the slide? Does it look aesthetically appealing? Or do you think all of these things play a major role in making a slide defined as amazing?
Mike, we're having a lot of people coming in and we have a clear winner, but let's give it another 30 seconds because we have about 54% of the people have voted, and we'll let you know. We'll share the results.
And thank you very much for voting. It definitely gives an inkling or an idea of what you're looking for. And I appreciate the fact that we heard that people wanted new ideas, wanted to figure out how to make sure that their slides presented complete messages, move away from the bullets, come up with something much more memorable, looking at PowerPoint and other presentation tools from a different point of view. This insight is very helpful to me to figure out what exactly I'm going to be sharing with you today.
But we have a clear winner, which is content is easily understood, meaningful, and audience-focused.
Got it. So in my experience, and I couldn't agree more, in my experience, when we define a slide as amazing, content really starts to drive the engine. It is a key component that often is forgotten in developing amazing slides. Additionally, what I found when I asked people is that all of these other variables play a major role in defining a slide as spectacular. For example, is the information memorable? Am I going to forget it after I see it? Does it look professional? Is it clear? Those components also play a major role. And I do want to remind everyone, stick around at the very end. We do have a special announcement, certainly worth your time. So in order to create these amazing slides, what I use and what people who I work with use is a presentation toolbox. This is how we're going to be able to create amazing slides very, very, very quickly. Now, we did a poll the last time I did a presentation expert presentation, and what we found is that the vast majority of people are going to be using PowerPoint. So I'm going to focus on PowerPoint, but rest assured that everything I'm sharing with you, the principles and the concepts, apply to Keynote, Prezi, and any other presentation tool you may use. Now, at the end, or just before when we wrap this up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply everything that we're going to share in our presentation toolbox to real slides and turn them into amazing slides. So we'll see before and after. I don't know about you, but I'm a believer when I see it applied. I'm a believer when I see the before and the after, and it also gives me great ideas. I'm a huge fan of seeing what can be done and if I agree that it's amazing. So the first step, the very first step, whenever I'm creating a presentation toolbox for myself or for others, is I create a presentation asset library. It's kind of funny that the acronym works out to be PAL. It is my PAL. And in that presentation asset library, there are 4 major components. The 4 major components are content, ideas, graphics, and articles. And I'm going to explain each one of those so we're all on the same page. So when it comes to taking this information, a key is to not just have it, but to collect and organize it in a way that's searchable and findable. So what I do is I put it in a directory or some tool. Some people may use Adobe Bridge, Extensis Portfolio, or simply use their file folders and computer structure to find things. That's fine. Just what I have found out is that if it's easily found, I'll use it. If it's not, then I might as well not have it. So when it comes to content, I have a library of ready-to-use content that I can customize. And that's important. I need to be able to customize it. Things like slides, support materials. It doesn't have to be my support materials. It can be the support materials of my customer. And if I work for a big company, then my customer are the folks internally. You know, if I'm working for a marketing department or an HR department or I'm doing training, as we've heard, many of us are, my customers are my internal customers. And I want to know information that's going to be used or reused in my slides. Other text like boilerplate or technical information, I don't want to just slap it into my slides. But what I want to do is I want to make sure that I have a starting point, because what happens is over time we massage and evolve this content, and we might as well leverage that. We also want to find quantitative data, movies or videos and sounds and music, anything that we think we would reuse. And I put that in a content library so that I can drag and drop, just pull in, copy and paste into my files to save me time. My assumption is that everyone on this call is like me, and we have very little time and money to do this. We have to pull off miracles. We have to make the most amazing slides possible with very little resources. Now, I'm a designer, and I can tell you that I still don't have time to design slides from scratch. I simply don't. So what I'm going to be doing is creating this presentation library to help get me there, to help me go from 0 to 60 in a few seconds. So once I have a pool of content that I can reuse, and I'm certain that some of you probably already have a flavor of this, then I want to create a little library of ideas. Now, poor Steve Jobs big fan of him, and he erroneously associated this quote to Picasso, Pablo Picasso. But Picasso didn't say it. It was in fact T.S. Eliot and perhaps a poet before him. But what the quote was good artists copy and great artists steal. And I would say good presentation professionals copy. Great presentation professionals or trainers or marketers or sales associates, business developers, proposal professionals copy. Well, great steal. And that does not mean plagiarize. No, 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 no. What it means is find something that inspires you. Leverage what makes it great, what makes it amazing, and make it your own. So here's a look at it. I have an infographic library. I also have a slide library and so forth. But I'll show you, if you look at my infographic library, I have just a huge collection of imagery and information that will give me inspiration and ideas. I'm a huge fan of using Google Images. Google Images is a great tool to help us come up with or find really interesting ideas. Do know that Google Images, everything that we see on Google Images is copywritten, which means that we simply can't take it and put it in our presentations. There's only a few ways we can legally do that, and most of which don't apply to what we do day to day. Do know that everything that we see is copywritten, and we have to make sure that we have permission to reuse it. Otherwise, I recommend going to stock image companies or something like that. However, when it comes to getting ideas, there's no reason why we can't use Google Images or Bing or any other search engine that offers this functionality to do it. And I'm going to warn you ahead of time, I'm so excited. I'm working from my home office for the first time in a while today, and I have a dog that loves to howl at sirens. And we rarely have sirens, but Murphy's Law says this is when we're going to hear some sirens, in which case we'll all hear my dog howl. So sorry about that ahead of time if it happens. So that is my information graphic library. I've got a library for all things that inspire me. And I simply go and I click through just like I was showing you. So once I have a growing, never stops. It's a living file folder, a living directory of all these things that give me inspiration and gives me ideas. Then I move on to graphics. Now, in my experience, not all of us have access to a designer, and those of us that do and or are designers really have a bottleneck situation where we have a huge pool of things to do and very, very little time to do it. So what I use are online tools. Now, because I couldn't find anything that had what I wanted, I came up with something called Get My Graphic, but I also used iStock Photo, Fotolia, Shutterstock, 123RF, I believe is something that Sharon, who was talking earlier, loves. Find the tools that work best for you and use them. When it comes to PowerPoint backgrounds and templates, boy, there is an embarrassment of riches out there. We have so many choices. I've gone to Microsoft and found tons of templates that I could reuse, modify, and use and create a wonderful backgrounds. And when I grab these graphics and graphic elements, I place them in directories. I find most useful is putting them in directories based on the graphic type, and then subcategorize the information within there. So for example, a Venn diagram, which is interlocking circles typically, is showing synthesis. So there's a possibility that I may want to use a Venn diagram for one subject matter and then 2 years later a completely different subject matter because it's the message, the overall message is synthesis. But the content may change, but the message of a graphic never does. So I break things up into graphic types because graphic types send very specific messages. So after I have my graphics, I create a library of how-to articles, information articles, and then I put them in a file directory. And here's mine. And you can see we have information from Nancy Duarte. We have information on color. We have information on just about everything that I've researched and need some how-to help, or I need some objective empirical evidence to back up anything that I say. I'll put it in my article database. And I can search that article database because nowadays Microsoft, Windows and Apple do a very good job of searching these files via an advanced search feature. And everything that we're going to be learning, I know right now I'm on a Mac, but we're going to jump over to a Windows machine in a moment. Everything that I'm doing, everything that I'm sharing with you works both Mac and PC. It's operating system independent. Okay, let's go back. So once I have my article library, it's time to close up my presentation asset library. Those are the things that are going to be there that I'll be able to grab as I need them, copy, paste, and throw into my presentations. So the next thing that I need to know are some tips and tricks. These are things to help me do my job better, faster, cheaper. The first thing is content-specific tips and tricks. When I say content-specific, I mean, how am I going to create that memorable story? How am I going to say something that I know is a complete message? Well, what I like to think of is a content ladder. This is a great visual metaphor, and the key components are knowing my audience. That's the first rung in my content ladder. I really want to know my audience because that changes everything. So, for example, when we're looking at these two slides, if I'm presenting information to the United States Army, which approach do you think would work better, A or B? I'm guessing you said A. For lots of reasons. For example, my audience likes to see themselves reflected in my presentations. The words and the content, the message is all about the audience. Now, on the other hand, what happens if we're onboarding or bringing in new staff to the Heidelberg company? Which approach do you think would work better, A or B? Probably B, because it's focused on a different audience. Changing the audience drastically changes the content and the message. So the next rung in the ladder is knowing the message. What are we trying to say? Taking a look at this classic presentation faux pas presented to General Stanley McChrystal, what is the message? What's the takeaway? One of the things that General Stanley McChrystal was quoted as saying, and I got to see him speak, and he is a character, I got to tell you. But he said, when we understand that slide, we'll have won the war. And this was the war in Afghanistan. So the clarity of the message isn't there. It is a bad slide. Now, I can promise you that the author of this slide is probably brilliant. And every variable in the equation of solving the problem is hidden in that slide. However, the presenter or the creator of this slide created the slide for themselves and not for the audience, who in this case was General Stanley McChrystal. Remember, it's all about the audience. So if I were presenting this, I bet you could figure out what the message of this particular slide would be. It's obvious this is how you perform an exercise. The message of this slide would be, here's the anatomy of an eye. If our goal is to motivate or persuade, and this is for all you sales folks out there, and trainers, we do need to motivate people to give a rat's patootie about what we're sharing. If our goal is to motivate or persuade, I recommend that our message starts with a benefit and ends with a how. Meaning that I don't care about something unless I know I can benefit from it. If it solves a problem that I have, then I want to know it. For example, training. If we follow these techniques and processes, we will increase the likelihood that we'll get a raise and a promotion. That's a reason for me to care. Make sure that if your goal is to motivate or persuade, your message has a benefit and a how. And if you can, throw proof in there. Numbers have teeth. I read or see numbers, I suspect or know, intuit, that this information is being measured, and that which is measured improves. We typically don't measure something if we don't desire a new outcome. So the last thing is tell a story. There's an old saying that facts tell and stories sell. I was recently at a presentation in Chicago, and there was an old saying, and it was attributed to Native Americans, and it reads, "Tell me a fact and I'll learn. Tell me a truth and I'll believe. But you tell me a story, and it will live in my heart forever." What this boils down to is that stories are emotional. Stories engage the visual mind. We begin to picture and imagine things, and then we begin to feel them. Feeling is so critical in change. For example, which tells a story better? The slide on the left or the slide on the right? You decide. It may not be the most compelling story on either side, but which tells a better story? Which is more engaging? And by the way, everything you're seeing, I created very, very quickly using my presentation toolbox. The entire deck, everything that you saw, everything that you're seeing, it's over 100 slides, took me a couple hours to make, from concept to execution, because I have a presentation toolbox. If you were in the room right now with me, I'd be giving high fives, because I'm a big fan of a presentation toolbox. Next step, now that we know our content, tips and tricks, here are some design tips and tricks. So when we take a look at these two slides.
Let me just interrupt you because I looked at those two slides and I launched a poll, so I may have been a little bit ahead. So why don't I go ahead and close the poll so we can get the answers?
Sure.
And I think clearly graphics is the winner.
For the which is better?
Yes. Yeah. Text is 1%. Graphics is 54%. Neither is. Both have a place as 45%.
Got it. So in my experience, based on lots of research, and yay for the 45%, neither is better. That there is a time and a place for both. I wish I could say the graphics are always better than text, and I wish I could say that text is always better than graphics. What we have found, what research has found, is that oftentimes visuals are very powerful. However, we've also found that visuals without text, the information is lost to ambiguity. I don't know if any of you have ever purchased furniture from IKEA, but they do a fabulous job of creating non-text heavy how-to instructions. Now the challenge is, were they created by someone who knows how to do it, or were they not? If they're not, I can promise you there's been a few swear words said by me because I couldn't get the darn thing together. But when they added the little bit of text with it, I was able to follow it. Both are very powerful. I use them together, never by themselves typically. Thank you very much for taking the poll. Now, one more poll. This is a question to help us speak to speed. When we're looking back at this slide, how long should it take to make the left road graphic? Do you think it should take 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours, or it depends? I'd love to know what you think.
We have a lot of people voting. Let's give it another 30 seconds. And I think one of the questions we have is from Samuel in the audience. Where can some of this research be found that you're talking about?
It can be found a few places. I typically tell people, I have a book out there. I'm not a big fan of pushing it, but I'll show a picture of it at the end. It's called $1 Billion Graphics. And all the research that I have found, I put into the book. One of the things I recommend is Googling the information, or email me and I'll send you specific research. For example, if you ask me, hey Mike, can you tell me if there's any research on do colors influence buying decisions, or does it change the outcome of training events? I'll send you what I got. Googling is, or using Bing or any other search engine, to find what we want works very, very well as well. And of course, you can pick up the book and find the research there too.
So, Mike, I've closed the poll. We have 66% who say it depends, 0% who say 8 hours. 4 hours is 4%. I love the number similarity there. And 2 hours, it's 30% of the audience.
Okay, so what I have found is with a presentation toolbox, the number drastically changes. So the question is, do I have the elements in my presentation toolbox to create anything that I want? If I do, then the answer is much less. For example, this graphic would take somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 minutes to 30 minutes to make if I have those tools in my library. If I don't, then it would take much longer. So the answer that I was looking for is it depends. It really depends upon whether you have those assets in your library. Thank you very much. The same applies for everything. You know, if it's a written document or a presentation, what we're seeing, the story that it's telling, the quality of it, greatly impacts our perception of the professionalism and quality of the information, and by association, the presenter and the company. Very, very important to know that. The quality of the content, the quality of the slide directly, greatly impacts the perceived value of the information, and the solution provider, training company, everything associated with that slide is going to be put in that same bucket, that same camp. Bad slides equal bad presenter equal bad solution, bad ideas, bad issues.
Mike, let me stop you here. We have a question. Somebody wants you to go back and define what you meant in the before and after slide about tools and how you would use, what tools? What are you talking about?
Great question. I'm actually going to get to that in a moment, but the short answer, let's go back to this slide. The short answer is the tool that I used to create the slide on the left specifically was Get My Graphic. There are other tools out there to do it, but we'll actually use the tools that I have at my disposal to see before and afters, and I'll do one real time so you can see it. And if I haven't effectively answered your question, please, by all means, ask again, and give me a scowl if you don't mind.
And I think we're not going to give you a scowl. You certainly don't deserve that. But one of the things I like that's, I think, a key point here is these are edible graphics. So you have the chance to make them yours and customize them for what you need, matching your color palette and whatever else you need.
Yeah, that's the whole reason for its existence, was because I couldn't find something as robust, as high-end as I needed. As a designer, I'm able to make some really cool stuff. But guess what? I need to do it really, really fast, and I need to be able to edit it in PowerPoint, real time, fast. I may or may not want other people to edit it, so I'll either lock it down by making it a JPEG, or I'll keep it editable and let other people edit it so that I'm not the bottleneck anymore. It just depends upon how I want to work it. So if we take a look at these two slides, once again, the professionalism of the information, the quality of this graphic in this instance, directly impacts the perceived value of the content. We have an opinion of the presenter. For example, if these were two graphics in two different slides, do you think company A is bigger or company B? Most people, when I ask that question in my workshops, they say, well, company A is bigger. Once in a while, I'll say, somebody will say, well, company B is bigger, and I'll say, oh, that's good, why? And they say, well, we're a big company, and that's what our stuff looks like. Wah, wah. That's never a good thing. These are actual graphics from slides. This is not the way to show and communicate quickly our professionalism. These are real slides, by the way. Not a good idea to use something like this. A lot of information here. Once again, what's the message? Is the message clear? If it's not clear, there's an issue. Is it easy to digest the information? If it's not, there's a problem. We want to make sure that everything is consistent. Everything's consistent with the message we want to send. We say that the information in our slides is the best of the best. We want our audience to be engaged and pay attention to it. Well, everything that we put in front of our audience should look like, feel like, and sound like the message we want to send. The professionalism, the content, the clarity, how much they remember, all is on us. That's why amazing slides are so important. What I find is necessary to create these amazing slides is a two-step process, and it involves concepting and it involves rendering. Concepting is thinking about the message, the story. It's the content development that we were talking about earlier. And then rendering is the making of the slide. It's creating the actual background. It's creating any associated graphics or finding images and photographs. And we put those things together. And when we put them together, what we have is a much better, brighter idea that can be objectively validated to whether it's accurate or not. Because if I were to ask you, is it audience focused, and the information on the slide doesn't mention the audience at once, doesn't have a benefit to them, doesn't engage them or pull them in, we can objectively say it is not audience focused. It affects us two ways. Every time we see an amazing slide, even when we see a bad slide too, we are affected extrinsically and intrinsically, consciously and subconsciously. Here's a point that is so critical to understand. Emotions, subconscious, intrinsic, whatever you want to call it, trumps every time cognitive. Every single time. Research proves it again and again. Read Dan Ariely's Predictably Irrational. Read Nudge. Read Tipping Point. Read any book on the topic of behavioral psychology, and what research proves is that our emotions play a critical role in any decision making, that we decide with our guts and then we justify cognitively. I'm not saying we ignore formal decision making or anything like that. What I'm saying is that our subconscious or our gut is an amazing supercomputer pulling in things subconsciously or intrinsically that we can't even imagine.
We can do the poll. I'm going to launch it because I think it's really relevant here, looking at whether or not text or graphics are better or neither, both have their place. Let's see after some of the answers you've done and some of the slides you've shared if people have the same opinion. And why?
I suspect I know the answer because this slide is definitely weighted to one answer.
Well, why we're doing that, I think Anthony had a really good point in the questions, or a really good question actually. Do slides need a presenter's words to make them impactful?
Oh, that's a good question. Now, hopefully I understand the question properly. What I understand the question to be asking is, what the presenter says, co-located with the slide, critical and important to make a slide amazing? And my answer, if that is the question, my answer is yes. The focus in a presentation, in my experience, and remember, I'm a guy who makes slides for a living, and I wish this wasn't true, but the focus should always be on the presenter and not the slide. Now, there are times when we simply have a slide deck that we have to give or leave behind. But ultimately, I want all eyes on the presenter. Now, in this situation, can you imagine if we just clicked through my slide deck and I wasn't saying anything? There'd be a real disconnect. We could do it, and it would be good, but it's more powerful with the presenter's words. So hopefully I answered the question and I understood it properly.
I got a note from Anthony. You definitely did. So here's the answer. Did it surprise you?
I'm guessing it's graphics.
No, it's actually not. It's 87% said neither, both have their place, and 13% is graphics.
That's awesome. Now, in this instance, it depends upon the situation. In this instance, it's certainly more weighted toward the graphic. My point on this slide was the graphics tend to communicate faster than text alone. Notice I said text alone. When we put text and marry the two together, we have a deeper understanding of the content. So yay, you guys rock. Thank you. Oh, great tool that you want to put in your graphic asset, your presentation asset library, and that is a graphic cheat sheet. What this is, and I heard some questions about new ways to show information, new ways to communicate more effectively. Download this little poster. You can print it out. It's up to you. But what it is, it's a cheat sheet. So when we're coming up with slides, all of the slides are going to fit into one of the categories on the left. We're either showing processes or cause and effect or relationships. And then it helps us choose the right graphic if we choose to go the visual communication route. So for example, if we're talking about relationships, we may want to use a puzzle graphic or a Venn diagram. If the information is more complex, we may want to choose from the orange column, and we may want to choose a funnel graphic or a pipe graphic or a spiral graphic. And you say, hey, I don't know what a spiral graphic is. Well, there's a website in the upper right-hand corner. Go to the website. You'll see thousands of examples of those graphics. Use them for inspiration. Download them. Edit them in PowerPoint, whatever you choose. It's a graphic cheat sheet to get you from I have no idea what graphic to use to I have the perfect graphic in minutes versus I'll know it when I see it, which probably makes a few of you cringe. It makes me cringe. I know it when I see it is a very dangerous, time-consuming, costly path. Now, when it comes to tips and tricks to using graphics, I highly recommend that you use a grid because the information on the left is exactly the same as the information on the right. The only difference is that I use the grid. It changes the feel and the message of the graphic because the content hasn't changed, but that emotional feeling that we get changes drastically. So here we have angles, no real architecture. It's kind of disordered. It starts to communicate that the process lacks order, is less repeatable. But when we use a grid, it changes the perception of that content, and by association, the perception of the presenter. And the presenter could be the company, the person, anything. Do know that emotions play a major role, and subtle changes can drastically change how people feel. For example, diagonals are dynamic and energetic, but they can make people feel uneasy or agitated. Now, if we have horizontal and vertical lines or shapes, it shows a sense of stability. It's controlled, but it can be perceived as boring. And then what scientists found is that curved edges are calming and soothing. But you may not want to show that to people who want to see the solution as being more robust, being hard and fast, and not soft. And watch out for noisy slides. Oh, noisy slides are so bad, ladies and gentlemen. Very, very bad. When people see it, their eyes glaze over, their heads go back, and they fall asleep. I do recommend ubiquitous fonts. The only two fonts I have found, now I know there are others, and Nolan Hames, who gave an amazing presentation earlier, has a list of them that he received from someone else. The only two fonts that I found almost guaranteed is on every machine is Arial and Times. I recommend using one of those fonts in our presentations. And do know that when we create our content and our graphics, we want to make sure they're balanced, because imagine putting a fulcrum underneath of the graphic or the content, does it tip to one side or the other? If it does, it's going to make people feel uneasy. If your goal is to make people feel uneasy, by all means do it, but if it's not, avoid it. And things do not have to be symmetrical to be balanced. In this instance, the picture of the shuttle to the left is very balanced. The reason why is because it's angled down to the left. Go ahead.
Questions pop up. So one of which is, would an impactful slide grab us emotionally first and then give us the data, or would a great slide provide the data first and then grab you emotionally?
Oh, that's a great question. Everything in the world always grabs us emotionally first. For example, the first impression of anything that we see, according to science, is the color. And color equals mood. For example, if I were to paint your room right now red, it would change your heart rate. It would change how you feel. It might make you warmer. It would change a lot of things emotionally and then physically. So the first thing we see is emotional. But really what I want to do is combine those two things so that the emotional is consistent with the cognitive information that we get. So the data is proof. Hey, you thought these people knew what they were talking about because their information is clear and concise and professional? Well, guess what? The content proves it too. I want to marry those things together. That is a great question.
You know, and it goes to another question too, because one of the folks in the audience, Karen, asked, do you think templates with numbers and how many points you want to get across is helpful as well?
Yes, numbering points is very helpful. What I have found is there's such a thing as the rule of 3. People tend to like things in groups of 3. Now, research that I have found hasn't proven why. Also, keep the number no more than 9, because according to research, our brains can't remember more than about 9 chunks of information. Normal people. The more stuff we have, the more likely it's going to fall out and be forgotten. So what I always recommend is that figure out the key 3 points that we want people to walk away with, and that becomes our numbering system.
That's great. I want to keep you on track because I know we're going to keep running, and I just love all the questions. So we'll save them for the end.
Thank you. So here we have an instance of unnecessary aesthetic embellishment. The version A is bad. It's very difficult to understand the delta between the two lines, the Jamestown office and Vienna office. Do not use unnecessary visual embellishment. My rule of thumb is if you can't give me a reason for the aesthetic embellishment or for the aesthetic decision, it must be deleted. Why is it 3D? I can't find a reason, delete it. Now we can create amazing, amazing graphics in PowerPoint from scratch. I'm going to fly through this because I did it in an earlier presentation. Look it up. PresentationXpert has an amazing archive, and you can watch me do this step by step. But what I'm showing you is something I created from scratch in PowerPoint. So I created a rounded rectangle. I rounded it further. I filled it black and gave it a gray outline. Then I took circles with gradients. Now the first circle I put a gradient from dark to light, and then the next circle from light to dark, and then vice versa. And what you find is that when you take these and you put them together using the align tool, we have something that tricks the eye and makes it look three-dimensional. So I took that and I put it into my shape, and then I repeated it and distributed it evenly. Then I drew some lines, put some text in there, or I could put the text directly within the wheels. And this is going to be a conveyor belt graphic. Created an arrow, and I made sure that it went from opaque to transparent. And then I repeated that arrow, and then I evenly distributed that arrow. I put these things together, drew some boxes on top, and then I have a conveyor belt. Or I could use the 3D tools within PowerPoint to make it look like it's in 3 dimensions. Again, this piece of the presentation is in PresentationXpert's archives. By all means, check it out. But you can create amazing things in PowerPoint. So let's take a look at some design tips and tricks. That was design. Let's take a look at some editing tips and tricks. So I like everything that I do to be vector. And what I mean by vector is that it's easily editable in PowerPoint. So if we take a look, vector shapes are typically quote-unquote clip art. Now clip art has a negative name, not a big fan. But watch what happens. If it's clip art, it's resolution independent. So if I scale it up, it retains its edges. It's clean, it's crisp, it's easy to edit. I can modify things by moving the elements out of it. Whereas this is a photograph, that's raster, and notice when I blow it up, it looks blurry. So I try to always use vector shapes. So let's take a look. I'm going to do some real-time editing. I've downloaded some graphics from that website. Let's launch it in, we're going to launch Windows operating system because I'm guessing most of us are operating Windows. So what I like to do is, if you want to notice everything's going to be vector, I make sure that I create all the elements in PowerPoint and then put it into my presentation asset library. So if I want to change any of the functions or any of the elements, I can click on it. If I want to, let's say, animate it, I make sure that the elements are independent so that I can break them apart. And I recommend that we use transparent PNG files for any raster elements or photographs. And I recommend 200 dpi because they look fabulous in print, but they don't bloat file size. And if we create things like this, here's a trick. If I wanted to scale this down, watch what happens to the fonts. They're messed up. Well, yay, PowerPoint is a powerful tool. Look what it can do. I can simply click on the decrease font size, and I have everything set back up in the blink of an eye. It allows me to change just about everything that you see. So the way I like to set things up is easy to edit. Now notice I have what looks like a gauge graphic. What I did was I created an invisible version of the arrow so that when I rotated it, it rotates around itself. Now if I were to ungroup this, notice what happens. If it was independent, it would rotate about itself, which is bad. If I create elements that are quantitative, I make sure that they're always data-driven. So if I were to change this, it's easy to modify. I make sure that everything that I create is easy to edit quickly. Make sure that it's vector, so that if I wanted to change a color or highlight an area, I could do it. If I wanted to break it out, I could do it. It's all about easy to edit. When you create shapes, make sure that you can easily change edit shape and change it to circles. If I want to make it look more flat, so I would click this, because the new style is flat versus skeuomorphic, which is 3D. So what I would do is I would get rid of anything that's associated with three-dimensionality. So I would immediately remove the shadow, no shadow. I would fill it a color that I want. Let's say I want to fill it, gray, and then I would give it a white outline. So we'll give it a white outline, and we'll choose a thicker line style, which is right about, where's my line style? Murphy's Law. Hold on. It's a me thing. I'm a little schizophrenic because I go from Mac to PC, and so I start to lose which is which. So here we have something that looks a lot flatter and so forth through simple changes. And notice because it's vector, I can change it very, very fast. I can scale things up, and I have no issues. Everything retains. I can break things out, get rid of elements. Grouping and ungrouping, I can start to delete elements that I don't need. Why? Because it's vector. And I can get rid of all the pieces that I no longer need and move forward quickly and fast. Okay. And I group things hierarchically. I think that's how you say it. So if I were to ungroup this, I would have this piece now. And then if I were to ungroup it again, then I could pull this out. It's very intuitive and quick to change. So yay, vector. Once again, vector elements allow me to change things very quickly. Oh, and here's a cool trick. So let's say I want to change all these elements to red. And I'm sure many of you know this, but if I double-click on the Format Painter, it allows me to sample the style. Oh, I think you're going to hear my dog howl. It samples the style. So if I were to click here, double-click again on the Format Painter, notice I'm applying the style repeatedly. Whoops. Whoop. I keep on doing that. Escape. Oh, here he goes. Thank you, Woody. Sorry, buddy. All right. Here we go. Poor Woody. So that's a fast way to edit shapes. And then we were talking about the road graphic. How I made the road graphic was I used these elements to create, to assemble them to tell the story I needed. So it's kind of like an erector set or a Lego set. I put it together. Okay. So creating the graphics, all the graphics that I make and all the graphics I made for Get My Graphic, for example, were all vector because I needed it to be easily modifiable, very quickly to modify. So that's tips and tricks. Let's move on to before and after. I want to make sure that we see what's possible. So I'm going to real-time modify a graphic. Let's move this down. Let's open up. Donna, if you're on the phone, thank you very much for sharing your slide deck. Really appreciate it. So here we go. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to view my slide master. And I'm going to get rid of the noisy pieces in the background. I'm going to close my slide master. Again, this works Mac or PC. It doesn't matter. And I'm going to take a look at this slide. And I looked at all the slides, and I'm going to do a few of them. But what I thought is another way, a cool way to show this. So what I did was I went to iStock Photo for another one. This one I went to Get My Graphic, and then I went to tear sheets. And what I did was I searched tear sheets, which are different ways to show text, and I found something that I thought was going to work just fine for me, which was the book quote. I love the book quote here. So what I did was I downloaded the graphic, and I copied it from here, copy, and I created a new version of the slide. Got rid of this. Whoop. I no longer need the title because I'm going to rely on the speaker to say it or the content. So I'm going to copy the text out, bring it in here. I'm going to paste special, whoop, unformatted text, and I'm going to scale this up a little bit, highlight it, bold it, and now we have this. And I can use the highlight feature to highlight anything that I think is significant so that we point out the most important pieces. Now I did the same thing with this graphic. I downloaded a pyramid graphic, and I changed the color very quickly. And so here's what I wound up with. I wound up with this. This is the before. I'll show you. This is the before. And this is the after. Much more compelling. It shows our professionalism, etc. I also tackled this slide. So this is the before, and this is the after. Again, it's more compelling. My assumption is we can't change the template because the powers that be said this is the template we shall use. But if we could change the template, I'd certainly recommend changing the template. So let's take a look at another one. I used iStock Photo for the next example. So we started with this slide, and I tackled the very first slide, close this out, which is an overview for customer service. So I read this slide, and I figured, what are we trying to say? And what I found was we're talking about teamwork. So I modified it. Once again, this is the before, and this is the after. This is fast, down and dirty solutions. May not be the perfect solution, but it's fast and it's inexpensive. And it looks professional, and it took me somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 minutes to do. So I put this information in there. It's going to be far more memorable than this. I can promise you. So let's take a look at a few more. About 5 more to be exact. Here we go. So here's another before. It's talking about a life cycle. Perhaps it's a repeating life cycle. Perhaps it's a repeating process. So I downloaded a graphic from Get My Graphic, threw it in there, put the text, converted the text, and then I put a benefit. What I find is placing a benefit or an outcome engages the audience more. And because it's vector-based, if I click here, if it's vector-based, see, I can modify anything. I can click on an element. I can quickly change the color to whatever I want. Because it's vector-based, I can make all kinds of changes. I can scale it up and down. I can add a title bar to the top, which is a simple bar. I can change the style by changing the fonts and changing the colors very, very quickly because it's vector-based. Or I could have used a conveyor belt visual metaphor and spoke to each one of the elements individually. I could use the same concept for this slide. This is the before, and I thought a conveyor belt would work perfectly for a linear process. So I used a conveyor belt. Once again, this is the after, and this is the before. The next example, we were looking at a slide that communicated the benefits of purchasing this new tool, and the audience were hotels. So if we were to read this, what's the message? Who's the audience? Well, we know who the audience is, and the message, after we take this in, we realize the whole point of this slide is to say that our solution saves money, is easier, and is faster. So here's what I did. I downloaded some icons, I made those to highlight, and then I broke out each of the things that we're offering, and I said how they fit in with those benefits. So it's free to hotels, it's going to save you money. It's user-friendly and intuitive interface, it means it's going to be easier and faster. It fulfills the needs of 4 applications, that means it's going to do all 3 things, and so forth. It's a very fast and easy way to chunk information and make it easy for my audience to understand. Thanks again for sending these slides in. So here's the before, and what I recommend is changing the title so the title is the benefit. Now, for those of you who do government documents, you can't always do that, and I'm sorry, but if you can, change the title so that it's benefit-driven. So here's the before, here's the after. Now the title is Improve Employee Performance. I moved the logo down to the right. You could keep it at the top. It really doesn't matter. I was just trying to get extra real estate. So what we could talk about is work-life benefits, and that includes short-term counseling, that includes, and a live 800 number. We put all those things together. They work together to give us these 3 benefits, and that overall improves employee performance. That's the goal. That's the benefit that gets the audience excited. Once again, a process that's fairly complex to understand. I downloaded it from Get My Graphic in this instance, or you could make it yourself. It doesn't matter. Put it in your presentation toolbox, and this is the after. So what is Scrum development? Well, step 1, we do these things. Step 2, we have a product backlog, and we choose the features that we want. A product owner helps select those features. Then we have a backlog. We figure out how long it's going to take. Then we do what's called sprints, and we talk about that, and then it ultimately leads to software being ready. Last example, we have a slide. We're trying to communicate information. In this instance, our goal is to say we're going to try to take 2 divisions within our healthcare company and put them together. So we have this text. Instead, what I recommend is we keep the slide blank, and we show that we have Division 1 with our strengths and weaknesses, Division 2 with strengths and weaknesses. We put them together, and we have the DNA for a new, better division. It's using a visual metaphor to communicate something pretty complex. So that's it for now. I think Sharon has something to share with you.
Thank everyone for attending. We're going to go to Q&A in a second, but Mike has been kind enough to put together a special offer for this audience, which saves up to 93% of the monthly cost of the graphics, and it's $99 a month, which is terrific. So just go to this URL, and you're welcome to look at what the opportunity is and to take advantage of it. Again, it's just for our audience. So Mike, I'm going to turn it back to you for questions if you want to put your next slide up. And we have a ton of questions.
And I mentioned the book. The book's out there. Get it if you want. It's cool. Whatever you choose to do. But let's take some questions.
Okay, so we have, would you show the vector raster slide again, just to kind of quickly go over that?
Absolutely. You got it. Thanks for asking. Vector raster was right. It's going to be the last place I look. Murphy's Law. Here it is. So we have the vector versus raster. Here's some information. Vector is easier to modify. Raster is more challenging because you'll need a program like Adobe Photoshop. Vector can typically be modified within PowerPoint if the file was constructed properly. Other times you'll need Adobe Illustrator to modify vector. However, I recommend bringing your vector elements into PowerPoint. and that way they're completely PowerPoint native. For example, once again, this graphic is completely PowerPoint native, so I can change anything I want to, colors, anything. Hopefully that was helpful.
Absolutely. So the next question we have was related to how many slides should be used in each presentation?
How many slides should be used? That's a tricky question that I don't have a good answer for. Some people say a slide a minute. Some people say a slide every 2 minutes. My experience is it depends upon the presenter's style, meaning that there are presenters that go really, really fast, and I've seen people do 5 slides every 15 seconds. They were flying through it, and it was an amazing presentation. And I found other people that if they did that, it would be a horrible crash and burn situation. So I recommend finding out the presenter's style and let the content and the audience's needs drive that decision, but the presenter style is going to be a key component. I wish I had a rule of thumb answer. Most people say a slide a minute. I found that it just depends.
I think that's great. So I have a question from Mary Ann who wants to know, any recommendations for using slide masters? Her slides often need to be rebranded with client colors and fonts. And if we don't use master slides, the branding process takes that much longer.
Yes, absolutely. Definitely use slide masters. Now the challenge is, depending upon the complexity of the information shared, in those instances I recommend keeping your slides simple, because using the themes or the slide color choices, notice you have a theme, a built-in theme, changing these will automatically update the imagery or the colors in your presentation if these colors have been used, meaning that you can choose colors that are independent of these, in which case the colors will not change. So if you want to make it easy to change, keep your slides very simple. The challenge, of course, is that you can't have anything very, very robust, because these are only a few colors to make up a huge spectrum of options. So yes, definitely create the color themes, and that'll be your fastest way to update for new customers. Change the background, change your color theme, and boom, you're good. But really what I'd focus on is the background content and less about the foreground content.
So next question is, you showed a global map where each country can be colored. How can I get that?
I downloaded this one. I'm guessing it's this one. I downloaded this from Get My Graphic. That's how I got it. And all the elements are vector. The same is true for this graphic. All of the elements are vector. So if I were to click on this, modify it, it just changes that way. So that's how I got it.
So we have another question, which is, what are your thoughts on the use of a whiteboard in PowerPoint?
I love it. I love it. I would say if you can draw real time, it's very engaging. Don't be afraid of the quality of the drawing if you're having fun with it. It's okay that if your drawing looks like you did it with your foot. It doesn't matter. We don't have to be Picasso or Michelangelo to pull this off. We're just trying to engage people by doing something real time, which is unique. There's an old saying, content is king. I disagree. Content isn't king. Contrast is. Do something different in your presentation. Make it stand out. People will pay attention.
Yes, hi. We have a question or a comment from a couple of people who said, how can you tell if an image is a vector image?
The very fastest way to tell if it's a vector is if you notice when I click on, now I can't, hockey puck, can't find it. So here it is. If I click on it, will I be able to select individual elements on it? So for example, if we look at this and I clicked on this within this graphic, notice I can move pieces. It can be deconstructed. Whereas if I click here, I've got one image. There's no way to deconstruct it. If I go back to this, I can deconstruct it. If I click on it, I can start to break pieces out. That's the secret.
That's great. So question is, what do you think is the benefit of Prezi over PowerPoint, and how do you think audiences react differently between the two presentation modes?
Well, I think where Prezi excels is its contextual, meaning that you understand the larger context of the message. The way Prezi forces you to make your slides is that it forces you to think macro to micro. So you think big picture, 10,000-foot view, and then you go down into the details. And it also, the transitions by default tend to follow that path. Now, you can do the same thing with PowerPoint, but PowerPoint is set up more as a linear storytelling tool, whereas Prezi is more contextual. Now, the one downside with Prezi is it doesn't handle raster images very well, photographs. It loves vector. And the other thing is the default transition has been known to make people nauseated. So watch out. The last thing we want to do is have our audience need an airbag, if you know what I mean.
So to speak. Anthony has a great question. It was interesting that some of the after slides were built via animations to make them clearer. Is animation a need to have to make slides clearer to audience, or was it just the content where it fit?
It was just the content where it fit. I'm not a big fan of dancing baloney, I call it. If there's no reason for an animation, I don't include it. I use an animation when I want to what's called chunk information, when I want to use it to tell a story, but I don't want to reveal all the information. For example, in the DNA slide, if I were to bring the DNA slide up all together, you'd know where I was going. Whereas because I was able to bring it up piece by piece, we have something called cognitive dissonance, meaning you don't know what I'm going to say before I say it, so you're more likely to pay attention. And then when I do the big reveal, it's kind of like a collective, aha, that's cool.
So is there any way to add additional accent colors to the theme color menu? There were only 6. Any way to add more?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. So we have a couple of questions, one of which is, can you show your book again so that people can see it?
Sorry.
There you go. And then we do have a comment for Woody, that he's a good dog and he has a lot of fans out here.
Thank you. I felt bad because when he was howling, I reached over to him and said, shh, and he thought I was mad at him, and then he walked away. So I felt bad. And he bumped into the table, and I just felt like a bad owner. But thank you.
Well, definitely we're still getting, yes, we love Woody, so from Robert and other folks, so I think that's great. Last question here. Is in designing e-learning where there is a little bit more interactivity, but there is no presenter, do text or graphics become more important than the other?
Well, I do a lot with e-learning. I just gave a workshop at the American Society for Training and Development, which is now ATD, or is it American Society for? I'm going to get in trouble. I'm pretty sure I'm right. They changed their brand. It's brilliant, but they changed it and messed me up. So
I think it's Association of Training and Development or something like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. Association, American went away.
Yeah.
So what I found is that visuals do play a major role when the presenter isn't available, because the presenter is actually a visual. So when the actual presenter isn't there, I'm going to rely more heavily on a visual to represent the entire message, and then we're going to use that as a roadmap throughout our entire presentation. So it, once again, like Prezi does, it gives context. Here you are in the grander scheme of things.
Tell you a little bit about where you can get a recording. We have a YouTube channel, which is where we host all of these webinars. You're welcome to go there if you want to watch it again, or if you want to share it with someone. And again, just want to thank everyone for coming and hope you have a great day. We're going to end the webinar at this time.